All right, Paul Alaje, lead economist at SPM Professionals, joins us now to give us his first words on the GDP numbers. Thank you very much, Paul, for joining us on the show. Good morning.
Thank you for having me, and good morning.
So, 0.51% as against 0.11% in the fourth quarter 2020. That can be termed anemic. And 0.51% is against 1.87% in the first quarter of 2020. That's a contraction. And when you compare this growth rate relative to population growth of about 3.2%, according to National Population Commission, that is poverty for many Nigerians. So, should we be cheering about these growth numbers?
Well, the growth number comes with mixed feelings. 0.51%. It's good news compared to where we were this time a quarter ago, which we had a year-on-year report to be 0.11%. So we are still moving in upward direction. But this growth is very slow. This growth is not fast enough. This growth is still crawling. But we should first be happy that we are not going down. We are not going to the negative territory. But what should be of concern should be the subsector division. What are the sectors that are growing? What are the sectors that have continued to remain low and backward? And which sector have started picking up? If you look at telecom sector, which was among the champions we had in the first quarter report, is still positive, but the positive rate is now almost 50% of the rate of growth. What does that mean? So we should also look at agri sector that's also returned positive. But when you compare that with what we had in last quarter report, talking about Q4 2020 year-on-year report, why did we have a difference, some growth, but when you compare it to what we did this time last year, it's also not good enough. So when you look at it, it's as if there's efforts to move, but the key fundamental of growth has not been adjusted. That is why we keep saying positive growth that is not sufficient enough. But when you look at where we are coming from Q2 2020, where we had minus 6.4, and Q3 where we have negative more than 3%, you would agree with me that yes, we're in positive territory, we have recovered, but this recovery is not sufficient enough.
All right, when we look at the sector growth, as you mentioned earlier, the growth rate of the agriculture sector, which is job elastic, slowed in the first quarter to about 2.28% from 3.42% in the fourth quarter of 2020. We can't attribute this to the insecurity situation, but what do you make of the policies towards boosting agriculture?
Well, policy toward boosting agriculture, some of them are commendable. You recall that Central Bank has taken the lead through Anchor Borrowers Program for selected produce, which include rice, in some areas cocoa, and some other farm output. Those are commendable things. But what seems to be missing is connection between the farms and the market, our research institutions, and our farms. So, and there is no way you can excuse security and provision of power on our farms and beyond our farms, our livelihood, because eventually production is not completed until it is consumed. So farmers find it very challenging when you know that in suburban Kaduna State you could be kidnapped and you have to pay ransom, and the cost of what you sell your output, I mean the revenue we generate from output of farm is not commensurate with the ransom we hear on television. So it really does not make sense for farmers to go to farm when they know that what seems to be ubiquitous now is banditry and kidnapping, particularly around the food zones that we have. I know we can produce food in every part of Nigeria, but when you need to pay critical attention to North Central region and Northwest. They seem to do better than all other regions in some output of food. You can look at rice, for instance. You give it to Kebbi State. You come to North Central, you give it to Nasarawa State. Apart from that, you have Niger State. And when you look at these regions, apart from Kebbi, Nasarawa State Governor has mentioned the presence of Boko Haram training. Niger State Governor in recent time has also mentioned. And what are the areas that are affected? Areas with high level of insecurity. Leave GDP, let's look at the implication on the cost of food. According to National Bureau of Statistics, for the first time in a long time, we have seen a reduction in inflation on just 5 basis points, from 18.17% now to 18.12%, even though many people in the market are wondering how true that figure is. And I've said, well, you need to trust it, because when the figures were not so good, some people accepted it, some people did not. So you may not totally agree with what authority has published, but that is the only authority we follow for now, so we have to agree with them. But 18.12% is worrisome, is disturbing. And so when we talk about the insecurity and power supply, and more importantly now, logistics, moving from one point to the other. And when you look at the avenue kidnappers have used, people have been stopping their vehicle, march to our forests, to our bushes, and they've sent videos or call their relatives for ransom to be paid. So this is a big issue we need to be concerned about. We are seeing GDP figure saying there are concerns we need to do about food. We're also seeing inflation figures that are saying we need to do a lot about insecurity. And the numbers don't lie.
So now, two disturbing trends, not only from this data, but has been historically consistent, is that real GDP growth is much slower than potential GDP growth. For example, in 2021, potential GDP growth, according to the EIU, is 8%, which is approximately 7.5% above real GDP growth. Now, this means that Nigeria is in a recessionary gap. Can you explain to us the implications of an economy that is stuck in a recessionary gap, and how do we get out of this conundrum?
Okay, so when you look at our production possibility frontier or production possibility curve as a country, you see a lot of young Nigerians with huge capacity which can be used at the manufacturing sector. We have enough sunlight that can support solar system, talking about power supply. We also have enough irrigation system which government can look into. But you see, ability to combine factors of production is what makes production happen. And who is the person to combine factor of production? For business, private sector is entrepreneur. For public sector, is the person, the chief executive, either in state or local government or at the federal government. But when those who are supposed to take responsibility don't know what to do or don't know enough what to do, I am sorry, you will keep seeing the gap. And the gap will come in evidence. The first evidence is unemployment figures. According to National Bureau of Statistics, 33.3% is unemployment figures. Unemployment is 22.8%. These are not my figures. National Bureau of Statistics Q4 report that the agency shared. When you put those together with inflation figure of 18.12%, you can measure what misery index is saying. And when I say unemployment figure, unemployment is not on the entire population of Nigeria. No, population is approximately 208 million people. Labor force, which affects unemployment, is a bit less than 90 million people. But if we are charitable and we say it's 90 million, you have 18 million people that are not qualified to work, that are not able to work, that cannot work for one reason or the other, that have to depend on 90 million people. Unfortunately, of these 90 million people, another 30 million cannot get decent job to do, according to National Bureau of Statistics. Add those to 180 million people, then you have 148 million people that are jobless, that cannot add effectively to the economy. You need to depend on 60 million people. Of the 60 million people, you have approximately 20 million people that are underemployed. So we should not be surprised that you are seeing banditry. You should not be surprised that you're seeing kidnapping. You are seeing people attacking police station. New trend in Southeast. You should not be surprised because the economy that will keep people at job is lean, even though I strongly believe it can do more. And one of the things that some persons have said in authority, both state and federal and even local government, is that there are no monies anywhere. And I doubt that statement. I doubt those statements saying we don't have enough, there are no monies anywhere. If you look at 2021 budget, government is projecting approximately 8 trillion naira revenue. This economy, particularly the federal government, should not do less than 40 million revenue. If you keep doing less than your potential, you will keep borrowing money. You've seen the new borrowing plan by Mr. President sent to National Assembly, 2.3 trillion naira. That money can be generated alone in telecom within 6 months if government know how to. I strongly believe that federal government of Nigeria is doing less in terms of revenue generation. And by this, I'm not saying you should task cyclists, locally called Okada riders. That's not the solution we are saying government should adopt. We're saying there are sectors, even from the report we are looking at today, if you look at sectors that grew the most, you would agree with me that telecom seems to have done well. When I say telecom, I'm not talking about the big names. There are organizations that are returning trillions of naira that government may not know about. I doubt if government know about this information. And these are people that are paying less in terms of revenue to the covers of federal and state government that I strongly believe if the right thing is done, government at federal level can do 40 trillion naira and state level can do cumulatively approximately 50 to 55 trillion naira. And you will not need to borrow. Such money will remain within our economy. Owners of those companies will not repatriate those funds back to their economy, giving our foreign reserve pressure, making exchange rates to be devalued, etc., etc.
All right, Mr. Elijah, but before I let you go, what do you think needs to change in terms of policy to ensure that the economy, returns to a more positive growth trajectory in the shortest possible time? And, considering GDP data and inflation data, coupled with vaccination rollout, how do you see this affecting the MPC decision?
Well, I think MPC, to start with that, will retain rates because when you look at inflation, you only have about approximately 5 basis points. When you look at growth rate is about 40 basis points. Those are just too slow. They are too slow. They are too minute for you to base your decision on. When you look at poverty, hunger, you look at inflation figures, they are still very, very high. So I don't think Monetary Policy Committee will decide because those are very fragile growth or things you can measure. But when you talk about what policy government should do, I think government needs to move from handout economic policy to economic policy that is geared towards development. Economics, you either focus on development, which will sandwich growth. So the day you start, the time we start seeing our GDP growth rate, we have seen it before. It's just that government at that time, they were focusing on growth. But if you focus on development will sandwich growth. There is no way you will develop without growing. But over the years, in the last 3-4 administrations, what I've seen is that Nigerian authorities have always wanted to grow without having conversation around development. Because of limited time, there is no sufficient time to look at what are the critical areas government should pay attention to and take decision on. It might not directly be government effort. It could be privately sponsored. It could be government idea, government initiative, or privately sponsored, privately executed. Then you can see significant development. If we don't do this, I'm afraid we will continue to have growth 1%, 2%, 0 point something percent, and call that from 2015, we've not grown up to 3%. Not one time have we been able to meet the population growth of the population commission, which is about 3%. And so we continue to grow in terms of numbers, but economy that sustains us, I'm afraid, is just too low for us to depend on.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Paul Alaje. You just said it, critical areas that government should focus on. I think that's a separate conversation, and I guess we have to keep a date on that particular issue on this show. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much for having me.
After the break, we'll get market perspective on the GDP numbers. Tajuddin Ibrahim, Head of Research at Chapel Hill Dunham, joins us next.